Hello everyone, my name is Colby Beckett. Today I'm going to be teaching you about how I pulled off this shot here. I did this shot for The Flash, Season 5, and how I pulled it off. I'm going to be teaching you a little bit how I did that in 3ds Max and Thinking Particles, and how I used the character's animation to drive the velocity of the particles. Just to give you some context, you can see here that we kind of see it start to crack, and then little pieces kind of come off, and then it explodes out. So because this is done at a studio, we're not allowed to have any files or anything, so I went ahead and made a test scene just so we can kind of see how I pulled this off. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first off, min-max, right? Just so I have something to kind of work with, I went to this site here called Mixamo. Mixamo is a great site for some free mocapped character rigs. The stuff's all ready to go. It comes in at FBX, and you can get some different things to do some R&D, to test some things. It's a very quick way just to get a character and get it into Max. So that's what this guy is, right? He comes in, he's body and skin wrapped to a bone system. Hide that. The ice itself, I went ahead and custom modeled. It's very simple, right? Just show you kind of the tree a little bit. Did a box, unwrapped it, gave it some smoothness just to kind of just auto smooth it based on a degree, just so when I turbo smooth this, it holds its edging a little bit better. Added displacement based on some mapping here. Where is it? There it is. Just simple noise map. I crushed the thresholds a little bit just so I get some peaks and valleys. And then I modified it a little bit just so it fit on the character a little bit better, just so it went all the way up. Some smoothing again, just so I can add this high detail displacement to it. And then I slice it because, as you can see, it's against the wall, right? So you don't want it intersecting that. And then I cap it just so it's a solid watertight mesh. After that, I went ahead and did a bool to it based on the character's arm, as you can see here, just to cut it away, just so we're not having too much intersection. Of course, there's still intersection that happens, but that's okay because we're not really dependent on collisions. So now that you kind of have a base idea of how I did that, let's open up the TP system. So in here, I traditionally like to work in cache levels, just so I don't have to calculate everything at once. I run the system, collapse it all down, and then build on top of that. Traditionally, what I do is I bring everything in with some object particles, right? Get the ice and the man being instant shape with the track, because you want the animation, and the ice just being an instant shape. When I use these initialized layers, I typically go in and let me just shut some stuff off. Oh, I also actually made a collision object, which is just the arm by itself, just so we're not calculating the rest of the body, and it's, it just does what we need, and it's kind of more isolated. So now that we have that stuff inside of TP, I'll go ahead and do a volume break on it just to give it its shapes. Let me turn it on and get it going. So as you can see, it just goes ahead and creates fragments. I normally do 100% and low raster with a high density, just so it cuts it a good amount. Right now, from there, this is somewhat of the important part of how this works. I bring in that man, the arm here, and as you can see, I spawn particles on top of that using a surface position. Let me hide this frags for a second. You can see there's particles all over it. We're doing it just based on some simple faces, subsample position, just so we get more frames. I'm having that happen only on the first frame. 500, no speed, no direction or anything, because in the next dynamic set, we're taking those particles, the red ticks, we're making it follow the hand here. The surface follow basically allows the particles to attach to the object and stay with the mesh as he's moving. The reason we do that is so, if I put this on drop so we can visualize this a little bit easier. Once he starts to move, we can see these giant lines here, right? These lines are vectors. These vectors kind of show the direction and the speed at which that hand is going. So as you see, as he slows down, the lines aren't as intense as when they start to move fast. That's the information that I want to pipe in farther down in my sim. And so I'm going to cache all that stuff out. We have the broken particles, right? And then we also have the character velocities. So now we have that, collapse it all, cache it. Next up, on how I put those velocities to the particles. Just to visualize this, I'm doing it based on in between those, so the velocity particles and the frag particles. And I'm reading a distance between them. And as you can see, they go to a group depending on that distance. So the ones that are fairly close will get thrown into that group. Now, I don't actually want to throw it into the group yet. I'm going to do that later based on velocity. But right now, I'm going to take the velocity from the little red particles, and I'm going to read that information. As you can see, you get your age, your lifespan, there's also velocity, right? That's the information we want. So we're going to run that out, and I traditionally put it in the math node, or helper node, just so I can kind of control it, because if not, the particles are going to shoot everywhere. It's too much velocities. It'll throw particles everywhere in the scene. So I multiply that by a small value, 0.1, so let's say the velocity is 100. Multiply it, we're getting 10% of what the actual velocity is. Now the math node reads in a vector, and a vector of the velocity is 3 points of information, right? You have your x, y, and z. The way we can kind of find that out, I use this a lot. It's called Show Info Tooltip. It's in the Master Dynamic. If you come out here, you can see, if you click on your particle, you can read velocity, size, spin, all that stuff. So as you see, we have the x, y, and z on the particle. Right now it's at 0 because it's not moving. But if I go ahead and put that cache back on, you can see, there we go, we get speed of x, y, and z that are a little more intense, right? It's moving 212 in x, 13, 18y, and so forth. And that's the vector, right? The x, y, and z. So that's what I'm running here, the velocity vector. I'm multiplying it by a value, and then we're putting that back into a velocity. Now, the velocity is getting applied to the frag particles. And after that, I just put in a group if it has any kind of threshold where it just starts to move. I'm just saying, hey, you know, you're active. I'm going to put you into the secondary group, which is the dark blue, the volume break 1. I'm going to say if you're in that at all, then you're allowed to have forces. So that way the stuff on the wall and stuff that isn't close enough to these velocity particles won't be instigated or start to have any motion. And then I also throw a shape collision on it just so that nothing's intersecting and we can kind of just get some stuff pushed away. It'll still be reading the velocity particles, but instead of the particles going inside the arm, they're just going to get pushed away with a collision. Traditionally, I put my floor nodes in a node. That way I'm not using it as a deflector, and I'm using the character as the deflector against the active volume break particles. So once I have all that, as you can see, stuff is getting thrown, right, all over the place. That's what I like to see. So these particles don't actually have velocity. They're inheriting it from these red velocity particles that I have attached to the arm. As you can see here, that's what's happening, right? The character animation is being pulled, and it's taking those velocities and throwing them out from there. Right, so once I do that, that's good, right? We have all the information we want. I'm going to go ahead and cache that, right? We're going to collapse everything again. That way all the stuff is calculated and I don't have to think about it anymore. After that, I start to build on top of that. I'll show you this. Okay, so as soon as he's starting to kind of break out of it, right? I want it to start to kind of crack, little pieces fall off, right? It's starting to kind of lose rigidity, and it's starting to kind of start to break. So I take those frag particles before on top of everything, right? So this stuff's already cached out. It's not calculating anything. I go ahead and take those, and based on a random value, I traditionally use these values. Anything over 1 will be active. So if it's picking a random value in between these, anything over 1 is going to be true. So it'll cast through. I'm only doing it from the very beginning before any motion happens. And I have it break again. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of tiny little particles. Each one is a very a low raster, high density again, but it's only happening on these individual big pieces. And I'm only activating a certain percentage of them, right? And I'm doing it from the center out. So center negative is another option. That would be from it would start from the inside and start going outwards. Instead, I'm doing center, so that way it's going from the out in. And as you can see, they start to kind of break off as soon as they activate. Let's see if I can find a better example here. So little pieces around the outside are starting to kind of activate, and it kind of looks like the ice is losing its solidness, for lack of a better word. So after that, right, we're volume breaking it on the fly. We're adding forces just to those guys so they fall downwards. And then also, once they start to move, right, anything that has any kind of velocity that's in the volume breaker, in the the blue particles, once they start getting motion, if they somehow are close enough to the red ticks on the arm, they activate. And I'm throwing them into a fragment node. Traditionally, I do it with no thresholds, 0 thresholds, and I do it based on smoothing angle. So anything that has a full 180 degree turn is going to get broken, meaning that all those tiny little shapes that are laid in on top of each other are going to separate. I give it a little speed just to add chaos and velocity, and leave my remaining shapes as none. Thickness is none. As you can see, these guys, as they're flying through the air, start to break apart. I also add a little spin just to add more chaos and to have them be a little more random. And all this information that's coming from here is basically being driven by these red velocity particles that are surface followed onto the character. Of course, after that, just another SC, right? The other SC I had is, or another shape collision. The other shape collision I had is collapsed. It's not thinking about it anymore, so I'm just adding another one on top. Not sure if this is safe practice, but I do it a lot, and it doesn't seem to have any problems. And yes, so this is how I get my particles to inherit velocity from a character animation. And just so you can see it again, this is kind of the end result. Obviously, there's timing and weighting and some tweaks that need to happen. That's all, fairly easily adjustable. You just go back in your cache, update some things. Makes it very easy to adjust in case they do update the character animation. They give, they change some things. Makes it very procedural and easy to kind of go back through from your from the start and build it up on top, and everything will kind of propagate through. So yeah, just to watch this again, this is the final result. I mean, obviously there's some shading and rendering and compositing that needs to happen. I also added some atmosphere onto it just to kind of make it feel really cold. And this is the end result. So I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, if you want more of this stuff, I'll be happy to give you some more tips and tricks. And yeah, thanks for watching.